that's just a theory. A film theory.
It's more me overthinking stuff rather than a theory, to be honest, or me seeing things when they're not actually there. Anyways, did you notice that in Mitsuha's bloodline from the shrine side of her family, there are only girls there? Well, today I'm gonna tell you why I think that is. I don't know if it's just a coincidence or Shinkai actually got inspired by the ancient history of Shintoism and the origins of Shintoism, but the female element in Mitsuha's family is pretty obvious, and I might be overthinking it, but at least it's fun. So let me tell you about the female-centric origins of Shintoism and how I think it connects with the girls from Your Name. First though, we would need to know what Shintoism actually is about, but I would go absolutely batshit crazy if I had to explain it every single time when I talk about this religion, so please just watch the short segment I did on it in my Noragami video, or don't. Who am I to tell you what to do? So, Shinto priesthood right now is absolutely overpowered by guys. Most of the kannushi are male, and most of the female staff at the shrine right now are mikos, who are more or less shrine maidens. Young girls, mostly teenagers and young adults, only helping with some duties and performing minor, very minor rituals. Just like we can see in Your Name. Being a miko is not really a job, it's more like an internship, to be honest. Someplace you can get an experience, or something you could write in your resume in today's Japan. A long time ago, Miko's job was much more important, oftentimes they would even travel the country to help others with their practice. But right now, their role is very limited. A lot of the time, if a shrine is run by a family, of course the daughters would help and would become a miko. But in big shrines that are not run like that, they would take daughters from respectful families from the neighborhood, or the daughters of the sponsors of the shrine to join as miko and let them gain some experience. There is not really much connection between mikos and the Shinto priests. They're not female priests at all, they're more like acolytes, I guess, of the Catholic Church, if anything. This male-centered Shinto practice we can even see in the movie when Mitsuha's grandmother only allowed her father to marry her mother if he promises to become the priest of the Miyamizu shrine. She made him the priest and not her daughter a priestess, even though it was possible because, as we know, after her son-in-law left the house, she took the responsibility of a head of a shrine, which she probably performed before he even appeared anyways. It is not illegal for a woman to become a kannushi in today's Japan, but if so, why are they so rare and why is their role at the shrine basically limited to being a miko? Well, it wasn't always like this actually. This kind of male-centric version of Shintoism was actually created in around the Nara period, when Shinto beliefs were already a few thousand years old traditions. Before Nara period, when the influence from China basically killed off women's status in the country, Shintoism was actually a religion that was led by women. A lot of it started with the first ruler of the country that was going to become Japan. At the time it was called Yamato or Yamatai.
The most important kingdoms were here, 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 and here. But this one was the most important.
Her name was Himiko, or Himeko, or Pimiko, and she was said to be a queen of Yamato as well as its prime shamaness, meaning the head of the religion of the country. Around the time of Himiko's life, Shintoism was starting to get more organized, but it wasn't a new religion. It was actually very old already, but before her, or before Yayoi period, the religion was just less organized and more scattered and very diverse around the country. But what was universal to the religion, no matter what it was the fact that the girls were thought to be the ones who had the special connection with the gods. They were thought to be the more spiritual ones. So because of that, most of the time they were the ones who were the main priests, or at the time more specifically shamanesses, because priesthood didn't really exist at the time yet. And they were the ones who were thought to be the holy ones, or the ones who had some powers from the gods. Men also took part at the religious rites, but they were more of a helping priest to the main priestess. They were the ones who took on more of the mundane duties like dealing with the believers rather than those spiritual ones. Male priests might have been just as common as female priests and they had contact with a lot of believers, but women were considered the more spiritual ones. That's why a lot of the time there was a male-female pair responsible for the rites. Oftentimes they were siblings too. The woman would contact the gods and take instructions from them, and then it was the men's role to take it to the people and make sure the god's will would be granted. There is a theory that says that this kind of spiritual connection that women had with the gods is the reason why the first ruler or first historical ruler of Japan was female, because her spiritual connection is basically unachievable to a guy. And she wasn't one of case too. After her death there were riots in the country, and through them a man sat on the throne. But he didn't rest his butt on it for too long, because people of Yamato weren't really happy with him being the monarch, so they overthrew him and let another woman named Io rule the country. Why wouldn't they be happy with a man? Because they didn't think he was capable of keeping a good relationship with the gods? Yeah, I actually think so. People at the time were very religious and superstitious, obviously, so I don't think that they wanted to risk their favor with the gods by letting someone who is not capable of bonding with them well ruin it for them. There is also another tradition that shows the importance of the bond between the women and the gods that's called the wife of the kami. And it's not clear when this tradition actually started. It might have happened around the time of Himiko, and I think that's quite probable. This belief says that the kami communicate with people through their priestesses because there is this kind of husband-wife relationship between them. That's why they're not allowed to marry as long as they perform the duty, because they must be a good maiden for the kami to want her. Just a bit creepy if you ask me. Also, this kind of role was only reserved for women because what kind of kami would want a guy as a wife? Yeah, ancient Japan wasn't really LGBTQ positive, was it? Or maybe it was, to be honest, I have no idea. I've never read anything about this. I mean, the samurai culture and kabuki world a few hundred years later was... Yeah, there were situations, apparently, but I haven't read anything about the ancient times. Anyway, it's not a video about gay samurais, so... There are also theories as to why the main kami of Japan is female. Out of the three main gods represented as the center of the pantheon, Amaterasu is the only female and she is the master of them all. Why a girl if right now the center of the religion could only be a male and the priests are mostly male too? There are two theories that talk about this, and first of them actually connects with the kami wife tradition that I just talked about. There are actually scholars that think that Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, at the beginning of Shinto tradition was actually male and was called Amateru. Though, don't Google it. Don't Google that name. I warned you, alright? Because apparently right now there is nothing spiritual about this. I warned you, alright? But because the marrying a kami tradition was so common at the time, he actually changed gender because he got associated with the gender of the priestesses that were supposed to represent him, basically, but instead they weren't seen as his wife anymore, but more as the personification of the god of the sun. And so the god of the sun became the goddess of the sun and changed the name from Amateru to Amaterasu. Seriously, don't Google it. The second theory is pretty straightforward, and it says that Amaterasu was actually just based off of Himiko, and at some point her figure just became the goddess of the sun. It is also said that in ancient Japanese Himiko's name meant the sun child or the sun daughter, which fit with this theory. Also, that is what later on the imperial family started claiming that they are, so are they descendants of Amaterasu or Himiko? Or both? Because they were one and the same? And they still ain't gonna let Aiko sit on the throne. Seriously, when the Prime Minister changed, I thought that maybe something would start happening at that front because they're still screwed. They only have one heir, basically. But I guess the current Prime Minister is even worse in that case. Even after Shinto became much more structured and Chinese influence made Japanese women much less powerful in their religious life or any other aspect of life, to be honest, priestesses didn't really disappear completely. They were pushed away from their duties by favored from now on men, but this kind of change in tradition wasn't going to happen fast. In the center of the country, yes, from Nara period there were only male priests, but on the outskirts of the country such news would travel very, very slowly. It took it more than 200 years to spread out across the country, but even then it was not an official law. Priestesses became very rare, but not completely extinct. And Itomori is what would be considered an absolute outskirt of the country. Well, even in the movie it was in the middle of nowhere. The Miyamizu jinja was said to have been built around the Heian period, which is right about when the idea of only male priest could have reached it. So it is possible that a guy was in charge, but it was also possible that the women were still important. It was at the end of the day very far away and in the middle of the mountains, which were very hard to travel through at the time. So I wouldn't be surprised if women, if they weren't priests, they at least still had an important role at the shrine. Especially considering that the preferred offering of the kami of the Miyamizu jinja is kuchikamizake, which is traditionally produced only by young women. Which you'd think would make the head of the shrine desperately want daughters, right? The legal ban on women becoming priests actually happened though in Meiji period, so only in the 19th century, and it was actually lifted in 1945 because, well, men were a deficit then. Yeah, because of war, okay? Because of war. And also the girls from the shrine families were already performing the duties during the war when the men of the family were gone. So they were just allowed to do it legally now.
Even though the ban was lifted, today female priests are not as common as the male ones, and often they don't climb up the ranks of priesthood, unfortunately. Mostly the female role in the shrines is associated with being a miko rather than the kannushi, but as I already said, right now it's not even remotely as important of a role as it once was.
So considering this history of Shintoism, do you think that Shinkai made an entire family of Mitsuha from the shrine side of her family only female because he wanted to represent this ancient women's connection with the gods and their superior spirituality, or am I just overanalyzing it at this point? I don't know if I went crazy or it actually makes sense. Though there's definitely a strong emphasis put on the linearity of females in your name, which is pretty obvious when you look at their names.
Grandma's name is Hitoha, which means the first leaf. Then her daughter was named Futaba, second leaf. First granddaughter was named Mitsuha, the third leaf, and second granddaughter became Yotsuha, the fourth leaf. The fact that Hitoha was left with the shrine also indicates that she was either an only child or only had sisters, which means that at least for 3 generations there was no son to inherit the shrine. In one scene we are shown the pictures of some past members of the family, but we have no way of knowing if the males there were sons of the shrine or adopted sons-in-law, like the ungrateful one Hitoha got. From this entire family we see that the girls are actually very respectful towards the gods and are doing their duties diligently. Mitsuha complained about spitting the rice, but to be honest, who wouldn't? But other than that, she took part in this religious life with care and interest. Hitoha also cared deeply about the shrine and the god enshrined there, and didn't want to leave it abandoned after her death, to the point she didn't let her daughter marry anyone if they didn't agree to become a priest at her shrine. Though, through that she got a son-in-law who basically said, "Psych, you thought," after Futaba's death, and basically it all backfired on her. That decision was, I think, one of the reasons why he got so estranged from his daughters. It was because he abandoned the shrine which they cherished and wanted to stay in with their grandma. They chose their female bloodline rather than the male one. They basically rejected the bloodline that didn't really connect with their god and heritage, and only took on priesthood to get a wife.
Which is understandable, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that forcing someone to a career is a good idea, but I'm only analyzing the spiritual aspect of this.
Here we can see that the girls, their mom and grandma, are the ones who care about the shrine. And well, again, Mitsuha after her Kagura dance complains about the countryside life, but I think it was more to do with the lack of the cafes rather than the hate towards the shrine. If she hated it, she would have gone with her father after all.
So am I trying to say that the girls from Mitsuha's family are basically like shamanesses and priestesses from the ancient Japan? Yes, I am. Also, the let's call it special powers of switching lives with someone is actually apparently a family thing.
Hitoha and Futaba both experienced that before Mitsuha, and probably other people did too before them as well. And yes, well, it is said only about the female members of the family because at the time the family only had female members, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Shinkai just said that yes, it happened in that family but only to girls.
Because as I said before, women were the spiritual ones, the ones the closest to the gods and the ones with the alleged special powers. And even the god from the Miyamizu shrine seems to favor women, as it, as I said before, apparently likes Kuchika Misaka as an offering.
神様は嬉しいんかな、あんなお酒もらって。
そりゃ嬉しいやろ。
So even if in the history of this shrine there were male priests, I don't think that the kami liked it very much.
Also, Mitsuha was the one who actually got the powers from the kami to save the village, not her father, who was supposed to be the priest of the shrine before. She gained the powers that allowed her to communicate with Taki, so that he could warn her, and in result she was able to save them all basically, because of her bond with the Miyamizu god, the same bond that all the priestesses had with the kami before in the ancient times.
Do you see a connection here?
I've connected the 2 dots.
You didn't connect shit.
So in conclusion, I think that the kami from the Miyamizu shrine is a simp that likes underage girls. Anyways, that is my take on why I think Mitsuha only has female family members, apart from her ungrateful father. And even if it's bullshit and Shinkai didn't even think about the ancient times of Shintoism in Japan, and it was just a coincidence that Mitsuha didn't have an uncle or a brother or anyone like that, then at least I got to tell you about the beautiful times when women in Japan had superpowers and weren't burned alive as witches for it, but instead were called queens.